Okay, Chapter 1, Module 1, Security Plus, is security concepts, basically an overview of what we've been looking at. And this module, we'll talk about the CIA triad, CIA confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the resources, and then how to distinguish between risks, threats, vulnerabilities. A little bit about security controls, and then how to distinguish events and incidents. They're related, but one becomes obviously more significant than the other. They both, I guess, kind of sound ominous, but incidents are going to be the more ominous. The first thing that we have to decide in security is what's being threatened. What are we going to protect? What is security is the practice of protecting assets from anything that might do them harm. And there are lots of things that might do them harm. And then what's an asset? The next bullet. An asset, anything it's of value to the organization. We're probably going to focus on the sensitive data. Some things are of value, but some things are of more value. And this is one of those. You're not going to spend $500 protecting a $20 piece of equipment. But we do want to focus on sensitive data because we're not going to have unlimited resources, unlimited money in order to buy all of the things that we would need to probably provide the kind of protection that we would imagine. But we have to make decisions. What are we going to do? What becomes important? What becomes the most important? And then down here, what does it include? Employees, individuals, people should be really high on that list because people are what obviously make the business go. And they're the ones that have the skills. We find that employees, of course, they come and they go, but as far as protecting them, they are an invaluable asset. And then we have physical property, the servers, the workstations, and maybe even the data itself, the databases, but those are probably going to be in business relationships. But we need to protect the business relationships to the point that we don't get into a situation that somebody don't want to do business with us because of a bad reputation, because we have a reputation of being insecure, we lose stuff, we have leaks of things. So this is all what's being protected. What are we going to do? Minimize that. And the only thing we can actually do with security is minimize. This list is security attacks. Some of the security attacks that have been around and the number of identities that have been exposed to them. Let's see if I can make this a little bigger, easier to read. But University of Washington, employee opened an email attachment with malicious software. Patient names, social security numbers, phone numbers. Maricopa County Community College in Arizona, 2.5 million. Unspecified data breach, social security numbers, bank account information, dates of birth, as well as academic information, may have been viewed by an unauthorized party. So when you start talking about people's social security numbers, credit cards, date of birth, those are things that you need to establish an identity. University of California, a physician's laptop, social security numbers, dates of birth, medical records, 8,294. And each of these is going to have a significant number. USB flash drive, missing that contain patient names, report ID numbers, test indication, ages, heights, weights, clinical summaries. All of these things that have been compromised are at least a starting point in order to compromise. The difficulties in defending against attacks, universally connected devices. The attacker could be any place in the world. We had an incident that when I was teaching, we monitored the headquarters activity, and one night we found that we had a full pipe outbound. So investigated a little farther, found out that there was an open port. There was an FTP port that was open. Investigated a little farther, and it was an anonymous FTP port. What had happened was that the webmaster wanted to update the website during the day, so the network administrator opened a hole in the firewall for him so he could FTP, connect FTP, upload the update. Did all of that. They forgot to communicate that, yes, we're done now and you can close that port. Somebody scanning from Germany found the open port, found the anonymous port, stashed the movie that he wanted to share with the world there. So we wound up unwittingly participating in a pilfering of a movie. I don't know what it was. It was just a movie. The increased speed of attacks as we have faster and faster and faster hardware, the ability of an aggressor to find weaknesses is reduced in speed. The updates, the Windows updates, there's been very few times that the hacker, the aggressor was actually ahead of the fixes. And that's why it becomes really important to do the updates. The first time, the time that the hole was found to the time of the first attack was in about 18 months. The latest one was probably about 4 days or something like that. It's getting down to where it's a matter of hours before the attacks happen. So those things need to be installed. Why significant? Because the attackers know what's in the update. They reverse engineer it to see what it fixed and then do vulnerability scans to find those unpatched systems. Once they find the unpatched systems, they know how to attack those systems. Sophistication, back to the list here, the sophistication of attack, the tools and their behavior are the same. Attack appears differently each time, and that's what viruses do too. They morph. They look at one point they look one way, and then they'll morph into something else. Makes it very difficult for the antivirus softwares. Availability and simplicity of attack tools. Google. Go to Google and look for a tool. There are a lot of them out there. Some of them are going to give you viruses, so you have to be careful of those tools, but the availability of the tools, faster detection of vulnerabilities, discover the holes in the hardware more quickly, delays in security updating, more and more holes, more and more people looking at them, so we're going to find more and more vulnerabilities that are available. Coders are humans. They make mistakes, and I think that there are so many errors per 1,000 lines of code regardless of who's writing it. So there are going to be errors in code. The hope is that the vendor finds out about those errors and is able to fix them before they can be used in a compromise. Weak security update distribution. Software products lack a means to distribute security updates in a timely fashion. Distributed attacks. The bot armies, thousands of computers are going to be attacking an individual. The introduction of BYOD, because the other person's device we don't have any control over. You can't force them to be secure. If you let them on your network, that device is on your network, secure or not secure. And then user confusion, required to make difficult decisions with little or no instruction. In the enterprise, we would hope that wouldn't happen, that the network administrator is going to be making those decisions, but at home in the BYODs and those sorts of things, the other devices that may be put onto your network, there could be some issues. And this is the understanding security. The goal is to be free from danger, and we're never going to be there. What we're going to be able to do is minimize the danger. It is, I'll say, impossible, at least very difficult and very expensive to become absolutely secure. You can take a server, put it in a barrel, fill it with cement, throw it in the ocean, and it's going to be pretty secure. Somebody might find it someday and be able to receive the data. Unlikely, but is it fairly secure? Yep. Is it useful? Not at all. So one of the things we have to do with security is strike a balance between what is secure and what is usable. And this is the process that achieves that freedom. So this is what security is. Harm and danger comes from one of two sources: a direct action that's intended to inflict damage, or an indirect, an accidental sort of thing. Well, I had an incident that we were doing a class, we were doing DHCP servers, configuring DHCP servers for a Windows class. And we were using virtual machines. It was a night class. Checked all through the activity, and everybody that was going to get on the network was on the network. They had an IP address. So they were a long enough lease that there weren't going to be any renewals. And so we wouldn't have any of the DORA process there. And the lab went fine. We did them, proved that they work for everybody. So the last step is, okay, now shut down your DHCP server and turn off your server. And everybody did that. But so the next morning when people came to work, the admin network, which was the wiring we were using, some people got the IP addresses that they should on the usable network with the default gateway. Others got IP addresses from my class, from the individual that didn't shut down DHCP server. So we had a denial of service attack, an accidental denial of service attack. Somebody trips over a power cord, unplugs something that they shouldn't, moves a wire that they shouldn't. Those are all things that can cause issues that aren't intentional. As security is increased, convenience is often decreased. And if it is just the server in the barrel of cement, yeah, it's pretty secure, but it's also not very usable. This chart is just kind of if the convenience is high, the security is probably going to be low. And if the security is high, the convenience is going to be low. So if it's secure, probably not going to be convenient. And if it's convenient, there's a good chance that it's not. One of the early things, the CIA, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the network. And these are the things that we use in security. Confidentiality, assurance that information is accessible only to those authorized to have access. And the breaches may occur due to improper data handling, or it could be a hacking attempt. Different ways. We could leave a document on our desk that everybody shouldn't be able to see, and then somebody walks in and sees that document. So they can be accidental or they can be intentional also. Integrity, and it's kind of lost some of the type here, the trustworthiness of the data resources in terms of preventing improper, unauthorized changes. What that means is integrity is the email that I sent is the one that you got, and we used a process called hashing to ensure that that happens. And availability just means that the systems are up, responsible for storing and processing information, are accessible when required by the authorized servers. Are the servers up? By authorized users. Are the servers up? Is the information available? Is the web page available? Is our store available? Can we sell things? Can we distribute the information that we need? A number of different ways to affect availability. Denial of service attacks, obviously, are the things. And they could be, again, intentional, or they could be inadvertent. The example I gave, we created an inadvertent, some terminology here, risks, threats, and vulnerabilities. And the risk is the chance of harm coming to an asset. And the risk is always a chance that something bad is going to happen. You buy stock, buy a mutual fund, there's a risk that it'll go down, there's a hope that it'll go up. Threat, anything that can cause harm. And then vulnerability is a weakness. In order to compromise something, we need a vulnerability. A threat, anything that can be used to cause harm, and down at the bottom, kind of a little hokey, how do things work? So the vulnerability here is the hole in the fence that the threat agent is the thief, can go through. And the exploit, we have to have an exploit to exploit the vulnerability as it goes through the fence. The risk that we have are the stolen rims or the car being stolen, and the rims or the car are going to be the assets that we're protecting. So terminology, risk, threat, vulnerability. And I think that exploit also is a term that should be added to this, because the exploit is the ability to take advantage of a vulnerability. Just because it's there, nobody knows about it, then it is not an issue until somebody finds out about it, until there is a way to exploit that particular vulnerability. The protections implemented to secure information: authentication, authorization, and accounting. The AAA. Authentication is when we prove who we are, regardless of what process we use. It could be a username and password, it could be a key fob, it could be a smart card, a number of different ways to do that. Authentication just simply says that yes, we have permission to use to get onto or to be authenticated to these things. When we authenticate the systems, the authentication servers are going to check our usernames and determine what we can do, and that's the authorization. Once you are authenticated, you prove who you are, we now ask for permission to use resources, and that's what authorization is. To use a specific technology here, specific resources. Can I print on a printer? Can I read a document? Can I change a document? And then accounting records what we do while we are on the network. So authentication, authorization, accounting. Keystones of security. This is a list of standards organizations. Each of them kind of does part of the standards creations on the network, and there's a list of them in the book, and it's got a paragraph, a sentence, a little description of each one. Instead of trying to go through those, take a look at what each of those guys do. And then here are the users that were the names that we use in security. Bob and Alice are the original nicknames. Bob and Alice are going to constantly have communications, and then we're going to have other users that have been developed over the years. They may try to interfere with them. We've got the alphabetic order: Carol with a C, Dave with a D, Aaron with the E, Frank with the F, and so on. And then some of them are malicious participants. Eve is the eavesdropper. Craig, the password cracker. Mallory modifies data, and the first letter usually kind of indicates what evil thing they do. And other names vary. Source and protocol being discussed, and we keep adding names to these things. But Eve is the thing that you're going to see, and we see Eve here. Eve is trying to intercept the message, man-in-the-middle attack. So Alice is sending a message to Bob, and Eve is trying to find out what's in that message. And this is where, how are we going to protect that message? What we're going to do with security controls, a number of ways to define them. And in this slide, we have administrative, organizational policies, training, password policies, legal compliance are all things that are going to be at the administrative level. And then we have technical controls, technological solutions like firewalls, authentication systems, encryption, the different hardware, I guess, things that we might be using in these systems. And then we have the operational, the day-to-day activities, backup management. Do we do backups? Security assessments, incident response, things that individuals may do on a regular basis. And then physical security, the safety and the security of devices. And physical security, probably the easiest thing for us to see, because we can see a device. We know what a lock looks like. We know what a locked door looks like. We know what an unlocked door looks like. So the different ways to do the security controls. We keep going here, and a little bit different way of defining these things. And we can have preventive, proactive, that prevent loss. These are the doors, the firewalls, policies, who can go where sorts of arrangements. Detective, monitoring controls, the detect and maybe record what goes on. Cameras might do that. Cameras, logs, physical and network alarms, the different things that will detect something that's going on. Corrective, to minimize the harm caused and prevent reoccurrence of issues. And then we can restore from backups, change the passwords. Deterrent are going to be physical signs to discourage an attack. No trespassing sign. And a deterrent and a detective could be the same. A camera, a visible camera, could deter somebody from doing something, as well as recording them doing the things that they weren't supposed to do. So in the middle of this thing, security controls, preventive, detective, corrective, and deterrent are the controls that we can use for these things. The visible. And, you know, we go back and forth on these, and yeah, we have administrative, technical, operational, physical. These are going to be the same things. The camera that we're going to use, you know, it would be authentication, encryption, operational, physical security. It could be probably on a couple of the things, technical as well as physical, definitely physical security. And then you can hear it could be a deterrent and a detective. The detective, monitoring, detective finding who did the thing. So the detective control the camera that's running that records somebody that does things for it, and as well as a deterrent, because you see the camera, I'm not going to do it because I know I'm going to be on the camera and they're going to have the information. Stories, and you guys know that I have a lot of those, and I probably told this one in Network Plus too, but when I was a network administrator at Blue Ridge, it was Blue Ridge Behavioral Healthcare, we had a lot of these things. We had cameras, we had the badges, the proximity badges that allowed you to only get into the areas that you were authorized to be in. So just because, you know, you can get into the building doesn't mean that you could get everywhere. IT could, because we had to go fix things. But apparently the company that put it in, one of their employees who should have known what it was like, got caught on the video stealing stuff out of the company, probably from the company that he was working for. But these things can come in handy. You know, you monitor what goes on. Cameras are everywhere now, and so many different ways. Confidentiality control. Again, terms that you probably have heard before in one of the classes, and a number of you have been to a lot of the classes, either in, you know, probably A Plus or Network Plus, and now in Security Plus, or some of the others that you had least privilege. What that means is we're only going to give users the privileges, the authority to do things that they need to do in order to effect their job, to carry out their job responsibilities. We're not going to give them anything more. And the stories, and again, some of you heard them before, but when I was at ECPI, and I was an instructor there as well as a network administrator, I was always the nighttime, and then the network administrator left, I became the network administrator, and they found out that it was probably easier to hire a networker than it was an instructor, so they hired a networker, and I went back to being instructor. But the nurses, we had a bunch of nurses there, and they absolutely positively had to be able to install this nursing software and try it out before they put it in the classroom. So we gave them that, beyond violated our own least privilege. And they install the software, and they install, you know, the shopping stuff to go on their web browser. They install viruses. So what do we actually need to allow users to do in order to do their job? And I think most places don't let you install software when you do those things. Need to know. Access is restricted to those who need to know it. And we talk about clearances, and a lot of you are former military, you got a security clearance, but just because you had a security clearance, you got a secret clearance, didn't mean that you could see all of the secret information, because a lot of that stuff you don't need to know. If you're, I don't know, if you're electronics, and then there are some things that are classified into propulsion systems, you don't need to know about the propulsion systems. You need to know about the electronics. If you're in the weapon systems, that's what you need to know about. So that's the need to know part of it. The separation of duties. And the separation of duties is like, okay, now that's really causing a lot of extra work. But separation of duties breaks the components down so that one individual can't compromise completely some process or some program or some whatever. And this one, the government work. I worked for a guy one time who was, they call it compartmented, and that's what that is, separation of duties. Everybody knew a little bit about a particular program. And there were a few people, obviously, that knew everything, but they worked on their elements of it, and then somebody else put it all together. Separation of duties, backing up the data on the server. Some people, you may have it set up that, you know, an individual does the backups and somebody else does the restores, so that the backup person can't back up, take the tape, and then restore the tape, steal the information. So separation of duties. Access controls. Access restricted to authorized users, and this would maybe be into different areas. Where can you get to? What can you see? What equipment can you use in those areas? And then encryption. You know, encryption is when we create gibberish out of something. Steganography is one of my favorites. That's when you hide something inside something, usually in an image, that you can put a data file in an image. And if you want to try that, there are a number of those. I think Stego is one of the, if it's still out there, one of the softwares that you can do. You know, just download it and see what it does. And this is one of those, you know, demonstrate to me what these things do. But steganography, when you hide something within something. maybe in a video, but it's usually going to be in an image file because the image files have slack space in them where you can hide things. Big thing about it really doesn't change the file size. So, those issues. Hashing, we looked at. Not everybody was here, so let me look at a hash one more time. A hash is when we represent a file or a character string, and I can't make this any bigger, with a fixed length string. And we'll say, let's use a different one. This is my hash. When I do that, it creates down here the different algorithms, MD5, MD4, SHA-1, 256, and the 512 you see is huge. This is what this thing represents. And we'll go back and do a snip of it and make a change to it. And let's just change the H from an uppercase or lowercase to an uppercase. This is my hash, and not the stuff you smoke. But when we do those, get the thing back over here, we made that change. The MD5, this one starts with AF80, and this one now starts with 9AFB. It ends with 9D2F0, and this one ends with ECB1A. So any small change in the character string or a document, if I did this is my hash, Mary had a little lamb, or did a hash of War and Peace, it's all going to be represented by that fixed character string when we do those things. And if you did a hash of War and Peace and you changed one character in War and Peace, it would change the hash. I just searched for hash creator, and this one's called hash calc. You probably do a let me see. Let's do hash calc. It does that. There's an online one at, only a bunch of online ones, and that's what took me a long time to find one that I could put on my computer. You can play with these things. The online, probably don't need them. I'll put this as one of the online ones. I'll put a link into the in the chat if you want to play with those things, because Caleb asked how can he get that. That's one. That's this one here. The hash calculator, the hash string, what you want to put in here. This is my calculate hash value. So yeah, we go down here and you get all the different hashes down at the bottom. We'll play with those, and I'll see if I can find the one that I have, and if I can find it, I'll put it in the. But hashing digital signatures. Digital signatures use certificates along with hashing. What they typically do, and we talked about public-private keys, they use the, this is the one case where you would use the private key because you want everybody to be able to use the public key to say, yep, this came from me. And what they generally are going to do is to hash the content of the email and then use that hash along with the certificate in order to create the signature. So the digital signature gives you the kind of the security that it hadn't changed, as well as verifies who the email came from. Backups, spare copies of the data kept in safe storage, and version control, preservation and tracking of multiple file versions. You can, at least theoretically, my Windows 10 quit doing previous versions for whatever reason. Previous versions that, we make a change and then save it, and oh, I didn't really need to do that, we can go back to the previous version. So we have the preservation of the availability. And availability is a big deal. Redundancy, multiple backup systems, and we've kind of talked about those. Redundancy, HSRP is Hot Standby Routing Protocol. And what that does, and you're going to get your first bad drawing here. What that does is takes a situation, it's called first hop redundancy protocol, the default gateway that we would use. And what we create inside of our private network, we'll have our switch here. Let's use a smaller. Inside our network here, we have a switch that goes to our machines, that goes to usually our default gateway, which then goes to the internet. What this does for redundancy is we have two routers running here, and in between them, or managing them, we have a virtual router, which has an IP address and a MAC address. So it's going to have one of these guys as the active router. So we're going here, and this is the active router, and this is the standby router. So our data going through the active router. Active router dies. What it does is automatically fails over and now sends the data through the standby router. So redundancy, we have two or more of these things, so that if one fails, the other one takes over. What's the problem here? One of these guys just hanging around waiting for a failure to happen. So is it a waste of resources? I guess the answer is you could kind of consider that. Let's give it a shot, Raphael, where did I lose you? Gotta help me. Anyhow, back. Redundancy, fault tolerance allows the system to keep moving. We did RAID, talked about RAID, that allows us to, we could have two copies on the same disk. We could have the RAID 5s, which had a stripe on it that allowed us to reproduce it, so that if one of the hard drives failed, we could keep running. Continue functioning after components fail. RAID, the redundant array of independent disks, are one of the examples of those things. And then patch management, updates with a minimal service disruption. And patch management is something that, I guess can, but I think at least what we used to do is do our patch management after everybody left. We did it with policies. If you do it during the day, and we used to do it during the day because on Fridays for the longest time we didn't have any students. And then we started having students, but we didn't change the policy. But one day the academic director came and said, my computer just restarted for no apparent reason. Well, the policy was configured that after you install the Windows Update to do an immediate restart. So yeah, it started those things, patch management, minimal disruption. How we got these policies set up. And then availability, and I think I put this one in just because we always talk about the what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nines. How much downtime is that? 5 nines, 5.26 minutes, about 5.3 minutes can be down. 99% is like a day and a half or something like that. 99% sounds good, but 99.999 to 5 nines. How long can we be down? And Don's got some good advice there. When you review the lesson online to help recover when you get lost, because I don't mean to lose you, and if I do, please ask. Compensating controls, also called an alternative control, is a mechanism that's in place to satisfy the requirement for a security measure that is too difficult or impractical to implement at the present time. Doesn't mean we're not going to do it. It just means that we can't do it right now. So we put an equivalent in place of that we can't get it done right now, but we're going to get it done. And sometimes they'll work and sometimes they won't work as far as being accepted as. Examples here, the ones that we have, the controls, the administrative, technical, physical, the things that are here, a directive, the administrative is a policy, a technical, the warning banner, a physical would be a security dog guard, and the deterrent, the administrative, demotion, or maybe even a discipline of any kind. Technical, a violation report, and then the physical, beware of dog. And you can see those things, you can read those things in the PowerPoint itself. Different types of controls. The next area, and defense in depth, castle defense. What does that mean? Is that we're not going to put all of our eggs in one basket. A concept in which multiple layers of security controls are placed throughout an information technology system. I guess that with my background, it kind of comes into then, and it applies to these things. But if I had this set of circles here and then we were out on ships in the Navy, my aircraft carrier would be here, and then I would have Around here, we would probably have like the destroyers, the shorter range things, or actually we may have the cruisers here, and then the cruisers out here, and then the aircraft out here flying around. So we have defense in depth. We're going to detect out here with the long range aircraft. Then we're going to come in with the probably the cruisers with with missiles that are, a little bit longer range than the destroyers that go here. So the different things we're going to do in order to protect the network. And when we do that with the networks themselves, with the security devices, in order to do those things, and policies and procedures. So the security risk is down here in the center. We have the vulnerabilities, and remember, the vulnerabilities are what we can exploit. And the risk is the probability that something's going to happen. So what we're trying to do is to reduce that probability. We're not going to eliminate. We're never going to be able to eliminate it. We can only do those things. I don't know. It's whatever it was for this image, and I don't really. Let's just say the vulnerabilities in here when we do those. And the vulnerability awareness, are we aware of them? So if we're not aware of them, and this is where some other tools are going to come in. We're going to do scanning. We're going to do detection of vulnerabilities. Firewall rules are going to be the things we're going to keep part of what keeps people out of these things. And then security policies and procedures and maintenance. The things that are going to do it, secure programming. Secure programming is when we do extra checks on the programs themselves to be sure that we haven't created vulnerabilities. Network configuration. And we talked about some things like that, maybe VPNs, VLANs, all of those things that we talked about in networking. And then training and experience. Training being a big one. Experience is something that we can't expedite, I guess would be the word, but training is something that we can do in order to make people aware of all of the risks that are available. And training, you're going to hear training. And again, I said, do we do it well? I guess some people do. Do we always do it well? I think the answer to that is probably not. Different image. What are we trying to do? And then the defense in depth, and the one on the left, I think, is the image out of the book. Users in the organization, the physical facility, how are we going to control access to the facility? ICS and yeah, thanks. Yeah, we'll call him Gip, I guess. Henry Gip. Yeah, ICS industrial control systems, or whatever we're trying to protect. And ICS industrial control systems do have some vulnerability because they're kind of going into a transition from isolated systems into public systems when we do those things. But back to the users and organizations, the physical facility, the perimeter network. How are we going to keep people out of the network? And the perimeter network's where the firewall or a filter router is going to be in order to do those things. And then the internal network, our protected network, our private network, where the servers are, where our users are. And then from there, we're going to go to the individual machine, the host machine. Are we going to have an antivirus software on all of these things? And probably the answer is yes. Are we going to be running the firewalls on all of these things? And the answer to that one may be maybe. Some people say yes, and some people say, we really don't need it because we have a network firewall. Problem with that is something gets inside the network, the host firewall or the machine firewall is going to protect it from within when the attack comes from within. Applications that we're going to use for these things, and then we get into the data itself. The other one over here at the top were procedures, the organizational security, the people, the personnel security, the products, the physical security, and then the CIA in the middle for the information itself. What are we trying to protect? Hardware and software. And then down here at the bottom, on every level, you need to identify critical assets, the ones that can't be easily replaced or which will immediately disrupt organizational functions. If in these things, and it goes back to what are we trying to protect? We're not trying to, and we're not going to be able to protect everything. And we're going to have to make some choices along the way because you're also not going to have an unlimited budget. Security itself, and the security by design. Security by design is when we start building something designing something, a network, a program, a script, and anything, that we have security in mind throughout the entire process. That's not always happened, and as a matter of fact, it didn't happen in the early days because they didn't ever think that any of those things were going to happen, that we have a lot of what we have today. Minimize the vulnerabilities, and here it says, it doesn't say eliminate the vulnerabilities, we're going to minimize them because, again, you're not going to have unlimited budgets. Can we make things pretty secure? Yes. Can we make them absolutely secure? Probably not. And again, back earlier that, yeah, if we put a computer in a barrel filled up with cement and throw it in the ocean, it's going to be pretty secure, but it's not going to be very useful. And that's where you got to strike a balance in security between the securing of the device and the usability of the device. There's always going to be some risk. We want to have minimal damage. We want to create a situation that if we have a compromise, that we will have minimal damage to the devices, to the network, to the information, to the ability to keep the business running. And that's what we're trying to do. We don't want to give away the business, but we want to do those things. And that's the keep it simple situation. Sometimes we outsmart ourselves by making a really complex security system, and by the time we go around the world and get back to it, it winds up being not as secure as we thought it was. But keep the processes straightforward, keep the processes as simple as possible. Limited attack surface. The attack surface basically are the ports that are open on the devices. So it goes back to the thing that you heard over and over and over. Shut down the application, shut down the services that you don't need on the systems themselves. Security through obscurity. This is where we try to hide things. And this is something that, and down here it says disable the SSID on a Wi-Fi. Yeah, that for the regular user, if we don't advertise it with the service set identifier, they're not going to know about it. But somebody that's a dedicated hacker is going to go use a scanning software, and they're going to be able to see that SSID. So security through obscurity, try to hide it, try to get fancy. And I think what they say is you probably want to use the standards, because then if you want to test them, you have a straightforward way to do it. You have a straightforward way in order to apply the security for the devices themselves. And one of the other ones, write in a foreign language. But somebody understands that foreign language, then they're going to have those. Security through obscurity, usually not one of the things that are recommended. It may be an element of your security, but it shouldn't be something that you depend upon for the entire mechanism. Just like the disabling the SSID. Yeah, the common person going through, looking at the number of wireless is available, is not going to see your SSID. But somebody that really wants to hack it's going to go get a Linux system and is going to do a wireless scan and say, oh, there's an SSID that's not being advertised. This is, and you may say splitting hairs, but the difference between an event and an incident. An event, any meaningful change in a system state. And what they say here, a router crashing or an email coming into the system are all events. They may or may not be an incident. The router crashing is probably going to be an incident. Events that are unexpected, unusual, and pose a threat. If the email has a virus in it, it may become an incident, but an event is just something that happens. An incident is something unusual happens, and it usually is going to pose a threat. And they're going to be in different forms, I guess, of positive, true negative, false positive, false negative. A true positive is something, a problem occurred and we detected it. The IPS, the IDS, the antivirus found the virus that came into the system. It was truly a virus. It was truly a problem, and we detected it. A true negative, not a problem. The email came in, didn't have a virus in it, and the antivirus software didn't say that it had a virus in it. A false positive, alert connected on a benign event. Got an email, didn't have a virus in it, but for some reason the antivirus software hit on it, said it did have a virus. Inconvenient, but not destructive. The next one is the real problem, is the false negative. We had an email come in with a virus, and the antivirus software didn't detect it. So now we've got a virus on the network. So a false negative is that there was an adverse event and it was not detected by the... So the next module, and there's 3 of them in this chapter, is how to identify assets and threats, to calculate risk, and how to manage risk. Because we're always going to have risk in these things. We're never going to be able to do away with it completely. It's kind of like driving on the highway. There's a risk of driving on the highway. So we're going to do these things. So a risk is a situation that involves exposure to some type of danger. Driving your car, the danger is obviously the other drivers. Highway, potholes, or rapid turn, the quick turn, and high speed, those sorts of things. So we have risk. And then we talked about false positives and false negatives a little bit earlier, but a false positive is an event that's considered a risk, but it doesn't turn out to be one. It's just like the false positive that we had on the detection, that, yeah, it said we had a problem, but no, we really didn't have a problem. Thank you. That's what I guessed, but I wanted to be sure. False positive is considered a risk, turns out to not to be one. And the false negative that doesn't appear to be a risk, but actually turns out to be one. So it's the same thing that we had before on the false negatives and the false positives. So the false negatives, an event that doesn't appear to be a risk, but actually turns out to be one. The false negatives are always going to be the things that can be very destructive because we get them into the system. Controlling risk, strategic, an action that affects long-term goals. What's the strategy going to be? An example there is the theft of intellectual property, not pursuing a new opportunity, a loss of a major account, a competitor entering the market, or all can be strategic risk. Compliance, following or not following a regulation or a standard. Breach of contract, not responding to the introduction of new laws. A financial risk, impact of financial decisions or market factors. Increase in interest rates, a global financial crisis. If you've got an IRA, a mutual fund, the market goes down. So those are all going to be risks, the financial risks. The operational events that impact the daily business of the organization, fire, hazardous chemical spills, power, blackout, power outages, different things that are available to interrupt the business itself. Environmental, the surroundings, tornadoes, flood, hurricanes, winds blowing the trees over, those sorts of things are all going to be environmental risks, and they have to be considered. And how often do you have those things? And I go back to Dallas, the tornado, and I think that's probably, it's the tornado area, but probably not that prevalent inside of the city itself. Technical risk, events that affect information technology systems, a denial of service attack, SQL, injection, an attack of viruses, the different things that technically can happen. And again, we're in a situation that, a lot of those things are available in scripts with the script kiddie sort of arrangement. Managerial, to the management of the organization, long-term illness of the company president, key employee resigning. Somebody has a heart attack. Those things all happen, and those are managerial risks. Controlling the risk, we talked about these a little bit earlier. Preventive, detective, and corrective. The preventive, to prevent the loss from harm or occurring, requires the installation of firewalls in the network. We're going to prevent outside users from getting on our network. Detective controls monitor the activity to identify instances where practices or procedures weren't followed. Continual review of log files to detect the abnormal activity. And then corrective, to restore the system back to the prior state before the malicious event occurred. Backup files, corrective files, backup files after the virus was detected or infected. Or if we had a virtual machine, we could have a snapshot and we could just go back in the snapshot, maybe a little bit faster. And I know I'm pushing virtual machines a way to do a lot of, particularly if you want to create labs for yourselves and not do damage to your machine at home. So risk assessment, and these are kind of the steps that are involved in this thing. Identify assets potentially at risk. Any of them are going to really be potentially at risk, and then we're going to have to do a threat assessment. If it's at risk, what is the risk? And if it's at risk and we identify the risk, what's the impact of the threat on the business? What happens if different damages occur to it? So what's the impact on the business itself? And then after that, what's the likelihood of the threat doing damage? What's the likelihood of it occurring? And if it does occur, what's the likelihood of it doing damage? And these are things that you say, there's a certain amount of guessing that goes on. There is a certain amount of guessing that goes on. We're going to have people to make these decisions, and then the educated people, you guys, are going to be making these decisions. Prioritize the risks by weighing the likelihood versus the potential impact of each threat, and then create a risk mitigation strategy to shape certain security policies. And I know I keep beating on the tornado in Dallas, but what are the odds that it's going to hit you? I mean, what's the threat? You know, that's a pretty significant threat when those things happen. What about flood? In 1985, Roanoke downtown got flooded. Had never happened before. What are the odds of that happening? And they had a lot of IT areas that had things on the first floor, so they got flooded. Tornado in late October. Yeah, I mean, what's going on? And this really isn't prime time for that, I don't think, is it? Hurricanes. What's the odds of having a hurricane? Of course, if you're in Oklahoma City, you're probably not going to have a hurricane. Tornado? Yes. On the coast, Virginia Beach, you could have either, because tornadoes frequently occur with hurricanes. So what's the likelihood of this happening? And if it does happen, what's the likelihood of it doing damage? How can you protect your stuff? And back to the IT stuff on the first floor. These are multi-story buildings. Don't put your servers in the basement. Put them on a different floor. And that way, if you have flooding, yeah, you're going to have flooding, but it's not going to destroy your IT when you do this. This is register field. These are some things that are going on. And we party hardy every time there's a hurricane. Yeah, hurricane parties. Cure things first. Yes, absolutely. So these are, and I got some examples of different things that we may use to determine how much we want to spend on each of these things. A unique ID and a description, the risk register when we create a risk register. What's the thing that we're going to do? What category is it in? To help group similar tasks. What's the likelihood of it happening? The business impact, the priority. Mitigation steps, residual risks after the mitigation, contingencies if the risk can't be prevented or mitigated, and then who's the owner of the risk. When you do this determination, this is kind of like brainstorming. Don't throw anything out. Don't criticize people that come up with them. Just put them on the list. After you get them on the list, then you can go back to the other things. What's the likelihood? Well, the likelihood of a zombie attack is probably pretty low, so maybe we don't need to do that one. But the likelihood of it happening, assign probabilities to these things, and then the priority. What is going to be the business impact? What kind of priority do we want to assign to those? Some of the ones that you may see, or the risk assessment here, it's got a reference, the risk description. So it's derailment, shunting, empty wagons, and this is obviously for shunting empty wagons is some sort of an industrial sort of thing. Derailment, I guess it must be rails, huh? Carriage, fire while on an open track, level crossing, schedule service on down the line. The date raised and reviewed whenever we put it on the list. And then over here, the potential consequences. And after the potential consequences, what are the consequences of these things? And then the likelihood from 1 to 4 of these happening, 1 being low, 5 being high. And then the consequence, the likelihood consequence, we add a priority to these things, and they multiply them to get a consolidated, I guess, sort of number to rank these things in the different priorities that go on. And then the safety controls that we could have over here, and the residual safety, and a number of different things. There's lots of different ways to do these things. This is another risk rating when we do these things. This is the top, says legacy Windows clients, the impact, the AROs, the annual rate of occurrence, the cost of controls, and then the overall risk for these things. Untrained staff, the impact and the costs that go along with these things. No antivirus software. What are we going to do? And these are just kind of thrown in the different ways to rate these things, to rank these things when we come up with a risk assessment of it. So over here, the initial risk rating of these, the initial risk rating, likelihood for these things, low, moderate, high, very high, or extreme, certain, almost certain, likely, and unlikely. So how are we going to apply the high, medium, low sort of arrangements to the likelihood of these things occurring to us? Identifying the assets, and that's the other thing. We got it. What do we own? And this is where inventories come in. And the inventories are things that, they're not so easy to do sometimes. You have to keep track of everything. But what do we have? What are we trying to protect? The identifying the assets. Customer information. Do you have credit cards? Do you have phone numbers? Do you have Social Security numbers? What do you have on that's involved with the customers themselves? Intellectual property, trade secrets, anything that you would have in that area. Financial data, security information. The security information could include the security assessments that you do, because if you have the security assessment document and somebody sees it, they kind of get an idea of where to attack, how to attack. Also, even the documents that you use to document the security can be an issue that we need to protect those too. The computing hardware and the software. The hardware, inventory, what's inside it. We used to have some isolated classrooms, and students, being not wealthy, would try to, and sometimes successfully, take the memory. Sometimes they even try to take the whole machine. What are we going to do with these things? How are we going to identify the assets? How are we going to know somebody took something? How much memory was in every machine? What kind of video cards were there? What softwares were installed in them? So the hardware and the software that's available to it, the business inventory. Building and other physical facilities that we have. What's in the building? What kind of resources do we have? Cash, if there's any there. And personnel. And personnel probably should be the first thing on the list, because they are the biggest asset. Branding and business reputation. You get a reputation of not being able to properly protect people's personal information. They're not going to give you a credit card. They're not going to give you their email address. They're not going to give you the information that you need in order to run the business. Business relationships, partners, the assets, organizations keeping the ability to maintain, I guess, the information that they give you so that it's only used in a business practice. We don't have the leakers. We don't have people talking when they shouldn't be talking of different things. And then the assessments. What could happen to us? An environmental accident, an environmental happening. And there are lots of things in the environment, and that kind of goes with the natural disasters, I think, here. Natural disasters, it could just be a big thunderstorm. High winds. High winds, we have that issue around here. High winds, and we have power losses occasionally. And that's something that happens. Or California now, I guess that the utility there has shut down power, PG&E, shut down power in large areas of the state because of the high winds, or had because of the high winds. And The last time they had the high winds, they had some significant financial impact because their power lines started some of the fires that caused significant damage. So natural disaster, the threat assessment, how are we going to treat these kinds of, when we have them, equipment failure. And those are going to happen to us. We know that anything that's mechanical, we used to have an engineer, CO has get ready to go for a big inspection. It says, is the plant going to work? Is the captain, it's a mechanical system subject to failure at any time. These are mechanical systems subject to failure at any time. Yeah, we have to be prepared for those. What are the probability of the entire equipment? What are the probabilities of a hard drive failing? What are the probabilities of a power supply failing? What kind of backups for all those things? And then the supply chain failure. That's happening right now. Saw a news report a couple of days ago, a body shop can't repair General Motors cars because General Motors on strike. The supply chain has failed. They can't find the parts that they need. They said they had a Cadillac been in for 2 or 3 weeks that they needed a door for. They can't find the door because of the supply chains. Human error, those are the ones that we're all guilty of, and those are going to happen. Malicious outsiders, and we kind of expect the malicious outsiders, and we protect against them with our firewalls and the keeping them out of the network. The one under there, the malicious insiders, are really dangerous because they're already inside the network. Firewall's not going to do us any good. Those things. So the assessments need to consider all of these things. And this is another one of those, the Site Risk Threat Assessment Ranking Process Example. But what do you want to put on these things? And this is not saying that, yeah, this is the way you do it. This is an example of things that we might have. Here, the risk assessment. The security maintains an ongoing process of risk assessment to drive security planning and resource. Statements that represent key risks to the organization or characterize a measurably effective security program. And then the level of concern over here, score 1 to 5. 1 is low, 5 is high. Team uses a local knowledge base of concern for the statement. Priority, setting where we should be. After completion of the ranking process, use this column to engage local management on risk exposure, level of risk acceptance. And when we get into risk, and probably another one, there's 3 things that we can do. We can mitigate it, we can shift the risk, which is what we do with our cars, we buy insurance, or we can accept them. So what are we going to do? What actions are we going to take with these things? Use of notes or alternative approaches and costs over here for the operation on financial implications. And the financial implications can be significant for these things. The property value, inputs, the site property value of it, and then the summary notes on the consensus approach, the challenges and opportunities. Again, this is not the end-all and the be-all. This is an example that you can use. SANS.org has a number of templates that you can use in the security area. They've probably got a template for about everything that you might need to do. The impact analysis was going to be the replacement costs of the devices themselves, revenue and opportunity loss, and the lost opportunity. It goes down, and we don't have a backup. A server goes down. Our sales server goes down, and we don't have a backup. We don't have redundancy or anything like that. How long is it going to take to fix it? How long is it going to take to repair it? What are the opportunity costs? How many sales are we going to lose during that time? I think I read a number one time that if Amazon goes down, and they have not lately, but they have in the past, they lose about $1 million a minute from the sales that they lose. The production loss, the human costs that could be involved in these things. And again, human costs, and we probably should have the human costs at the top of all these things, because the safety of the individual should be the thing that we worry about first. Reputation costs. And then what are the legal consequences? If you lose, 1 million Social Security numbers, what are the legal consequences? If you lose 1 million credit card numbers, what are going to be the legal consequences? What do you have to do? And a number of them buy you identity theft protection in order to make up for those. And I think I saw one the other day, who was it? One of them came up and said they're going to pay you $150. And then after they did the calculation of the number of people that were involved and the amount of the settlement, it came up to more like $5. One the other day, Yahoo had one, and it was up to $358 that they're going to pay for all of the people that were involved in the compromise. So what goes on with these things? The threat assessment itself, yeah, Equifax, thank you. Equifax did that, and what did that? You could either take the settlement up to $150, and it turns out it's not going to be $150, or you could take identity protection for, I think, 5 years. The threat assessment itself, we're going to have the hazard identification, the vulnerability assessment, and then the impact analysis. The hazards over here: fire, explosion, natural hazard, hazardous materials, terrorism, workplace violence, disease, utility outage, mechanical breakdown, supplier failure, cyber attack. Things that you might not say, oh yeah, that's going to be the things that we're going to worry about. And then the assets at risk: the people, the property, the supply chain, the system equipment, information technology, business technology, business operations, reputation, regulatory, contractual obligations, environment, and the data itself in here for the reputation and the business operation, the IT, regulatory, contractual. What are going to be the assets at risk? And then after that, what are going to be the impacts? Casualties, property damage, business interruption, loss of customers, financial loss, environmental contamination, loss of confidence in the organization, fines, lawsuits, penalties, different things that can happen to us when these threats become incidents, when things actually happen. Privacy threshold analysis, and this is the one-liner. Privacy threshold analysis says, does the system handle PII, personally identifiable information? Does it have things that can be attributed to individuals? And if that's the case, then we have to do a privacy impact to ensure compliance with the external regulations, internal policies on privacy. And the companies, and you get these things and you get them regularly, we've changed our privacy policy, and we've changed our privacy policy. What are they going to do to protect your privacy? What are they going to do to protect your personally identifiable information, the things that are related to you? Ensure compliance, analyze the potential privacy risks and impacts, and evaluate the security controls to minimize risks. And probably most of you have been involved in some sort of a privacy compromise within the past few years, because there have been a lot of them. They've lost credit cards, they've lost Social Security, and veterans, they really have lost a number of things. Government people, they had somebody had taken home a laptop with a big database on it, and then some kids stole it off the kitchen table, basically. Went into the identification, going to have to tell everybody that your information may have been compromised. They finally found the laptop. The information hadn't been compromised. The kids stole it to get $200 or $300 at the hawk shop for those things. And what can you do? Well, one, it was a violation of policy to take it away from the workspace. But if you're going to do it, what kind of encryption, what kind of security controls are you going to have on the devices when information goes outside of the organization? And those are some definitions here, some things that we have, and these are always things that make easy test questions on cert tests. Threat probability, the MTTF, mean time to failure, used for non-serviceable components. How long is it going to be before it fails? Non-serviceable components, light bulbs. Hard drives are not really serviceable. Mean time to repair. How long is it going to take us to fix the situation, to fix the device, to fix the element? Mean time before failure is the mean time, or between failures is the mean time between failures, used for serviceable components, things that can be repaired when we do these things. And when I look into into a computer, you know, there's not a whole lot of things that we're going to repair that I see. Power supplies, so I'm going to fix the power supply. They're not really repairable when you do those things. We're certainly not going to repair memory. We're not going to repair the processor. We're probably not going to repair the hard drive. But there are things that are going to be repairable, serviceable components. And then the mean time between service incidents is the time between the repair of the serviceable. And the cost, what's it going to cost? And that's what these things are about. The single loss expectancy is what it costs for a single incident. And the easy one is somebody walks off with a laptop. What does it cost on that single incident? Well, it's going to be the price of the laptop, obviously. Yeah, maybe the data, the build, you know, what is on it, the software that's on it, the different things that may be available because we have to put a new license on. The ARO is the annual rate of occurrence. How many times do we expect this to happen? How many times do we expect a laptop to walk out of the business on an annual basis? And after that's the annual loss expectancy, where we multiply the single loss by the rate of occurrence, the annual rate of occurrence, to get the total loss expected for each individual area. And we have to look at all of the different areas in order to calculate these things. The risk management, the impact, comparing the monetary loss associated with an asset in order to determine the amount of money that would be lost if the risk occurred. I guess lost would look better there than list. If the risk occurred. Two risk calculations are used: the single loss expectancy, the monetary loss, and the annual loss expectancy. The expected monetary loss that can be expected for an asset due to the risk over a 1-year period. How much are we going to lose these things? And back up here we got the probability and the impact. We're still ranking these things when we look at them. And different ways to quantify this is quantitative, the single loss, the annual rate of occurrence, and then we do the multiplication to get what's going on. So we can actually quantify what goes on based on what we expect. The other one's qualitative, which is, this is where we kind of get into the estimates, the probabilities that we have up here and what's the impact if these things happen. And these are educated guesses, basically, that we determine what the impact is going to be on the another risk assessment matrix that we do these things, major, moderate, minor, and then the medium, low, high, extreme, major, and then we have extreme losses on these things. And down at the bottom, unlikely. If we have a minor that's unlikely, then it's going to be low. If it's moderate, medium, and high, highly likely, it's still going to be medium. And the moderate, the impact of the risk, the moderate, if it's highly likely, 66 to 100%, then we're going to rank it as a high, and then the major and extreme. But this is just the probability of risk. Again, different ways to look at risk assessment when we do these things. This is like, okay, yeah, it probably not going to happen. It's got a good chance of happening. What are the chances of these things happening too? The risk management, I alluded to some of these a little bit earlier. Avoidance, avoiding risky activities, and ban the USBs. How, and the government, I think, has done that entirely. The USBs, drives, you can take an awful lot of information out of a company on one of those by putting it in the system, copying files that you want to exfiltrate, and walking out of the business with them. So what can we do to avoid that? Just simply don't allow USBs. But you got to consider other things too. I was talking to a friend of mine and said, oh, I just put it in my Dropbox. Well, that's a risk too. So what other, we got Dropbox, we got OneDrive, we got Box, got a number of different things. So banning USBs would, prevent those things. And would prevent somebody from plugging it in, because one of the ways that some perpetrators like to distribute viruses is on USBs. And what they'll do is, drop them in the parking lot. Somebody, oh, go find this USB and plug it in. And instead of finding out whose it was or going to format it and keep it, whatever, you just install a virus on these things. We can transfer the risk, sharing the risk with others, and that's where insurance comes in. Automobile insurance, we transfer the risk. Generally, we're going to take some risk because we have a deductible on it, but transfer the risk. Mitigation, where we want to reduce antivirus software, scanning for viruses, malware scans. Deterrence, visible controls to discourage others. Some of the things that we heard about, talked about a little bit early on, lights, guards, different things that are available. We can choose not to act on it. That, yep, it might happen. If it does, I will accept, but we can accept the risk. And then the residual risk is after we've taken the steps to mitigate risk, we're still going to have some left over because you're probably not going to be able to eliminate it, although we'd love to do that. But what's going to be left over after we take mitigation techniques, technological controls, policies and procedures. What are the policies? Do you allow USB drives? Do you allow people to get to their Dropbox? Do you allow users on social media? What are we going to do with these things? Routine audits. What is the actual circumstance? And the audit is when you compare what should be with what is, or the things that are actually going on. Incident management, and then change management. Change management, do we have control? And the story that I told earlier about the nurses, no, we didn't have control. And they made changes that impacted the network. Basically, we got lazy. And maintaining security is not something that's going to be easy to do. And if it's easy, it's, again, probably not going to be all that secure. Automated security controls, configuration tools, device configuration tools, and we've talked about, and what we networkers are trying to get to is the minimum number of humans, because you got to pay them every payday, and to be able to do as many things using the tools, as many things automated as possible in order to make the company more profitable. And that's what we're trying to do. IT makes things better. IT doesn't really make any products. Continuous monitoring and alert of the systems, logs, IPSs, intrusion prevention systems, intrusion detection systems, different things that we're going to monitor. If we do monitor the bandwidth, the SNMP monitoring software to see what is going on the network, the data flow, the CPU utilization, the memory utilization, hard disk utilization, continuous monitoring, and alert systems where we can set up alerts. If certain boundaries are crossed over, we can get an alert message. Configuration validation tools, and these are tools that will validate the configurations that we don't have an issue with those. Vulnerability scanners, a number of those are available. One of them, and this is maybe not the best example, and I know why I didn't want to do. Let me start this. I've got a piece of software here, now it is here, called BellArc Advisor, which is a kind of a vulnerability scan machine over here. The software won't come. This is running on a physical machine, but BellArc Advisor is free. You can run it against your machine, and it gives you a lot of information. This is Windows 10 Professional running on it, going on down. And the big thing up here, it says it's missing 3 security updates, and it's set up for auto updates, so I have to go and look at that. It'll tell me which ones are missing. So, it's a pretty big problem. The virus protection is up to date. When we look at that, the circuit board, what kind of memory's in it, so I'm getting an inventory of my system along with a lot of other things on it. When we do that, Eddie says he's used it a few times. This is a good inventory system. And one of the other things that, at least it used to do, is it'll tell you what your down here, what your key codes are for the individual softwares that are installed on the system itself. So you get an inventory, you get the keys. the security that goes on, what's on it, an inventory of the system itself when we do those things. So, Bell Arc Advisor, free, pretty good deal. There is also one called Nessus, which is an actual real vulnerability scanner that you can get a free version, as I call the community version, that has limited capability. I think it says that you can scan 16 IP addresses on it, which on your internal network is pretty good. You're not going to be able to do an enterprise with it. If you buy it, it's pretty expensive. But things like that, install and try them out. What's going to happen with these things? Remediation tools. Remediation, how are we going to get back to where we're supposed to be? The remediation, some of the things that we talk about on those is the authentic. When users get onto our network remotely, we check to be sure that they have the updates that the updates are current, that they have an antivirus software that is current. If they don't have those, we put them on a remediation network. Remediation to bring it back up. Patch management software. In an enterprise, WSUS, Windows System Update Server, probably something that we would use for the Windows ones. It goes to Microsoft, gets the updates, stores them locally, and then we can send them out, not during working hours, that we can have the system update them later on using a policy. Automated troubleshooters and then application testers, other automated tools, automated security tools that are available. So in this one, we're going to talk about vulnerability assessment, vulnerability testing and penetration testing. And these are two different things. Vulnerability scans are generally going to be not as, destructive, not as interruptive. Penetration tests can be pretty intrusive. They can bring a whole network down. And this is where you guys that are going to the ethical hacker, this is where the ethical hackers come. So we'll talk about vulnerability testing, how to perform a vulnerability test, and then how to plan a penetration test. We can find, again, where our risk is. And down here, vulnerability identification, result analysis, risk assessment, remediation, and implementation of what we're going to do. So the vulnerability assessment, a baseline review. And we need to have the baseline reviews because we need to know what normal is so that we can determine what abnormal is. So the baseline is intended, the existing intended security configuration. So what is the situation? What did we intend for it? Determining the attack surface. All the software and services are installed, and this is where port scanning can come in handy, because the attack surface, what are the applications that are on the system? What are the services that can be attacked? Do they have vulnerabilities? And there are a number of softwares, and that's what I'm doing over here. You see me doing this thing. A number of softwares that can be used in order to do these things. Reviewing code, if we're writing programs. Code review is a big thing, and that the code has not introduced vulnerabilities. That we use code checking software. That we haven't left unchecked buffers for buffer overflows to do those things. Reviewing the architecture and the design. And the architecture and the design, what normally you're talking about there are our programs themselves. And that's where a lot of our vulnerabilities come from, and when we see these things, we got a buffer overflow, we got a this, we got a that. We have to have the vulnerability, and once we have the vulnerability, we have to have some way to exploit. And that's not always going to be the easiest thing to do when we look at these things. And if we have done all of the checking and have taken out, mitigated, done as much mitigation as possible, then we should have fewer compromises. Going to have, turn the services off. And why do we reduce the number of services? So we don't have a big an attack surface. What's the difference between a Linux machine and a Windows machine? And if you do a scan on them, probably going to be the attack surface, although Windows is not as bad as it used to be. Early on in NT4, they just started everything. They just figured that, what's the big deal? They didn't worry about security. They wanted it to be available to the individuals when they set them up on the network. Not so much true anymore that you actually have to turn on most of the services. They don't start automatically. So you start with a reduced exposure when we start the system itself. The attack surface is going to be less than it would have been in NT4, for instance. NT4, it's about everything started on it. A vulnerability scan versus a penetration scan. Vulnerability scan is a broad and fundamentally passive scan. Examines the entire system, network, or organization, checking for a specific list of vulnerabilities. One of and what I was trying to do when I was doing this a minute ago, one of the things that you could use for this is this thing, if I could get logged on. Kali Linux is a system, here we go, that is designed for the security. The quieter you become, the more you're able to hear. The applications, if you go into here into the Kali Linux, top 10 security tools, it's got tool after tool after tool after tool. You can download it as a virtual machine. You can download it and install it on your system, whatever you want to do. This is actually playing on the VMware workstation. VMware Player is free. You can get it downloaded. IDS, IPS identification, CMS, exploitation tools, and in here somewhere we've got stress testing, vulnerability analysis, open source, OpenVAS, so fuzzing tools, different tools that are available to you. Metasploit, I think, Metasploit framework is one of the ones that is mentioned in the book. And the tools are not the easiest things in the world to use, because these kinds of tools are going to tend to be a lot of command line. They're not going to be as GUI oriented. Some of them are not going to be as GUI oriented as some of the other ones. The Nessus that you can download, and if you do it, you can get a free trial, but they kind of want you to do those things. But Nessus is a software that you can do that will do a penetration scan. And some people just use it. It should be used as part of the penetration, of the vulnerability scan. It will do this list of vulnerabilities and give you a listing of what's wrong with the system. Other things that you may want to do, specific list of known vulnerabilities, is password checking. And if you have, authenticated testing, which means that you log in as the administrator, you may be able to look at the passwords that the users have. I had a student that was in an MCSE class. He was a network administrator at a small business, and we were using some of these things. It was actually a password cracking software. And he said, I'd like to take that to work and try it out. And he ran it against his database of users and found out that it isn't pretty bad. It's pretty weak passwords. One of the reasons they were pretty weak is because they had to change them so frequently. And this is one of those things that, you've got to kind of use some common sense in security as to, what's secure and what gives you security. If you have to change them very frequently, you're going to have pretty simple passwords for these things. So what he finally did was go to the owner of the business and say, we got some pretty weak passwords. And they did a negotiation and came to a consensus that they would require a better password in the password policy, but wouldn't require the users to change them quite as often. One of the things that may help. A penetration test these are what the white hats do, is designed to prove that an asset can be compromised. It's an actual attack on the system. You hire a white hat hacker to use the tools and use the techniques that a black hat hacker, a bad guy, would use on your system. And the box down there, before you test security, be sure that you have permission, because if you don't, you might be confused with a hacker, and you might wind up with you might wind up getting arrested or something like that. A run-in with the law is what I was trying to think of when you do these things. And if you do penetration testing, you need to explicitly outline what you're going to do and what you're allowed to do. But anyhow, vulnerability scans are not going to be passive test. Look for open ports, unpatched systems, kind of a little bit like Belarc Advisor. Belarc Advisor would be a low end of that. I just did the individual machine. You can do more of those. Windows has a baseline security analyzer that you can look at your Windows systems with. You can download it. It looks for unpatched systems and security vulnerabilities. You can scan an individual machine. You can scan your whole network with this. Some of the other ones, and that I think Saint and OpenVAS were on the Kali Linux software, are available. Nessus, again, you can download it. It used to be, but I don't think it's on Kali anymore. The intent is the difference for these things on a vulnerability scan. Are you trying to hack the system, or are you trying to correct the credentialed or the non-credentialed scan? The credentialed scan is you put in a username and password, and you can look at the systems to the extent that you have permission to do it. Like, you usually would scan it as an administrator, and that's what the guy I was telling you about did. He scanned it as an administrator, and he could look at the password using the password cracking program. This is what a dashboard of Nessus might look like. And it's got over here the number of vulnerabilities that have 0 critical, 10 high, 7 medium, 3 low, 65 info, and then you can go look and see what the individual issues are. Again, if you have the opportunity before you do the certifications, I encourage getting all of the stuff that you can, all the tools that you can, to play with them, just to see what they do. The purpose of the scan is to find the missing security controls. What ports are open, and we can do the open ports with a number of them. WinMap or ZenMap for the GUI programs that we can use to look at open ports, either internally or externally. And it's kind of handy if you can get somebody to scan your IP address. Kind of handy to look at somebody scan you to see if there's any odd ports. Have a friend scan your IP address to see if something might be there that you don't know about. It's just one of the precautions that you can take. So we're looking at open ports. Are the open ports the ones that we expected to be open? Are the applications that we know are running? And to reduce the number of ports, we're going to reduce the services. If we don't need some particular service, turn it off, because it's going to have a port associated with it, and it might wind up having a vulnerability associated with it that somebody can compromise. Weak encryption, weak passwords. They kind of look for those things too. Weak passwords, and some of them do actually just scan for weak passwords, or scan to look at the passwords, and that's what the student did. He actually looked at the passwords that were on there. Misconfigured controls. Misconfigurations are going to happen on an all too frequent basis, and these scans, vulnerability scans, can help find unsecured data, unpatched systems, exploitable vulnerabilities, things that are available. And the vulnerabilities and the unpatched systems and the exploitable vulnerabilities are probably going to go with each other, because unpatched systems, if Windows, Microsoft, for instance, comes out with a patch and you say, I don't really want to put that on. What the professionals do is, once the patch comes out, they'll reverse engineer it so they know what it fixed, and then they'll scan for unpatched systems. Once they find an unpatched system and they've done the reverse engineering, they know how to exploit that. Keeping the systems up to date really becomes a big deal under those kinds of circumstances. Vulnerability scans, the intrusive versus the non-intrusive, credentialed versus the non-credentialed, and the Intrusive is when we actually can interfere with the operation of the systems. The non-intrusive are the ones that we're typically going to do to see, if we have vulnerabilities, we have unpatched systems, we don't have all of the patches installed on the system over there. And the little box over there, lack of security controls, no firewalls, no antivirus, no anti-spyware, misconfiguration, open shares, guest access. Windows systems has this user called guest, which is on all of them. And when you install the system, it installs the guest account disabled, but without a password. So if somebody can figure out a way, and a couple of the viruses have, to enable the guest account, then they have a foothold in the system. They now have an account that they can get logged onto a system with. Real vulnerabilities, the newer ones and occasionally the old ones, can be, the real vulnerabilities is that they actually are vulnerabilities. And the newer ones may not be in the databases yet. We don't know about. Sometimes the old ones just haven't been patched. The goals of the vulnerability scan, missing or misconfigured security controls, the things that we had before. Open ports, weak passwords, encryption, misconfigured controls, unsecured data, compromised systems, and that could be a big deal. Somebody's already hacked the system. Exploitable vulnerabilities, and then unpatched. The penetration test is designed to verify that a theoretical threat exists, not in the sense of does this attack exist at all, but can this attack really damage my newly secured system? Penetration tests are when a tester tries to actually do the compromise, tries to hack, pay them to do. And the steps down there: planning, discovery, attack, and reporting. Planning is when they're going to be doing the scanning, the footprinting. What kind of system is it? What ports are open? What kind of vulnerabilities does it have? Discovery, and then we're going to attack after the planning, and then the discovery, planning, discovery. I got them mashed together there. Discovery, what's available, what ports are open, are there vulnerabilities, the different scans that we could do on the system, and then the attack itself using the tools that are available, many of them on the Kali Linux. Reporting would be when the good guy comes back and says, yes, I found this, or yes, I found that. They're not going to report on anything that they didn't get hired to test. So vulnerability scans can still be important in finding where vulnerabilities lie with these systems. The penetration tests themselves, we had the black hats and the white hats and the gray hats, the individuals that do the hacking for us or the testing for us. The black hats, the bad guys, are actually trying to compromise systems, steal things. The white hats are going to be the guys that test systems for us without damaging anything, and they're going to have permission to do that. A gray hat is, and you see different ones, a gray hat is someplace in between. Sometimes they're good guys and sometimes they're not good guys. Sometimes they're just trying to prove that they know more when we do those things. But the type of testing, those were the individuals, same terms, but the type of penetration testing that we have is black box, when the attacker doesn't know anything about the system. And that would be what a hacker would have. System. A white box, full knowledge. Somebody that has complete knowledge, an insider for these things. And a partial, gray box hacker has partial. Black box, the little boxes down at the bottom. The white hat hacker is going to be, the good guy is going to be doing this. Black box testing gets no information. Gray box, limited information, and then the white box has complete information about the system itself. Reconnaissance in the phases: passive reconnaissance, active reconnaissance, and then vulnerability analysis. Things that we're going to do: try the doors, maybe one's unlocked. Don't open it. It's relatively easy to be seen when we do these things. We can do ping scans, port scans, DNS queries, operating system queries, and Nmap will do those things for you. Operating systems fingerprinting, service scans, version scans. Where are we going to get this information? On the website. Interestingly enough, think about job postings, because they're going to post a job. I need a Windows administrator. I need a Linux administrator. So you can find a lot about what goes on with a company job postings from the organization's websites. What do they do? What kind of information do they have? Who is? Where you list on the websites itself, who's the point of contact? What's their phone number? What's their address? What's their email address? So that you can call these guys and start doing the information gathering by talking to them maybe. News stories, contact names, email addresses, job boards, company privacy policies, social media and website posts by employees. Employees give out a lot of information, and a lot of information that they probably shouldn't. They don't know at times that they're allowing these things to happen. And in other ways, get a social engineering and dumpster diving. Dumpster diving is actually something we do. Go through the trash. You can find a lot of information in the trash. If you live on a street that people put their trash out and recycle and things like that, you walk down the street sometime and look and see how many of them put their credit card statement. Don't go into the trash and different regulations in different localities about whether you can or not. But if it's laying out, and I've seen them in the recycle bins of paper, the credit card statement, the electric bill, those things that have information that can be useful to somebody compromising. Shredders shred everything. Penetrating networks. Once we get there, we want to escalate the privileges. The first thing that a hacker wants to do is get a foothold. Once they get a foothold, then they're going to escalate the privileges. Get usernames, password hashes. And notice we're talking about password hashes, not necessarily the passwords, because the systems are going to use the hashes in order to do that. Additional privileges, find exploitable information, and then maybe install some malware. We may install something. There are a number of systems that you can install, create a backdoor that opens a port, goes through the firewall, because we're going from inside out to create a place that we can get back in, because you want to be able to, the persistence here. And we're going to install backdoors, create alternate accounts, compromising authentication systems, because you don't want to keep using somebody else's account. Look at the log, and why is the administrator being logged on so many times when we do those things? And then pivot, perform reconnaissance on the internal network. We're going to create tunnels to bypass the firewalls and other boundaries, and then exploit trust relationships. If you have encrypted data going through a firewall, it can't read it because it's encrypted. All it does is if you open that port with the encrypted data going through the VPN, you can't see that information. So the little insert there, try to break into the system. Be careful, because this can cause a denial of service or a loss of data. Buffer overflows can cause instability. Gain privilege and escalation. What we're going to do is get a foothold, and then after that, go to the privilege escalation. Get a better account permissions in order to do things. Try different vulnerability types. Password brute force, social engineering, database ejections, buffer overflows, different ways to try to get. It says password brute force. The first thing you're going to try is a password dictionary attack. A lot of the cracking software, password cracking software now, is hybrid. First it runs a dictionary attack and may crack part of the password, because part of the password is a dictionary word. All of the things that, they tell you when you make your new password, don't use dictionary words, don't do this, don't do that. Because the password cracking softwares are designed to do those things. There's lots of dictionaries on the internet. It's just a text file that's got a lot of words in it. Good words, bad words, all sorts of words. So we have this last set of questions, and then I'm sure your ears are tired. You won't have to listen to me anymore. We'll have a little bit of lab time here. A vulnerability scan can be intrusive or non-intrusive. True or false? It's true. They can be either. What you really, I think, kind of want to use is the non-intrusive ones, because you really don't want to tip the target that they're being targeted. What steps might be taken as part of a vulnerability scan? Yeah, bypassing security controls and exploiting vulnerabilities would be part of penetration testing. The others can be part of a vulnerability scan, finding the open ports. The vulnerability scan, exploiting, we're going to find the open ports, identify the vulnerabilities, and passive testing. We're not in the vulnerability scan assessment, we're not really trying to compromise anything. We're just trying to find things. What element of a vulnerability assessment compares security performance to existing security configuration documents?